Hello there YouTube, Gclef here, and this is my next installment of my critical thinking videos I'm calling Afrocentrism and Critical Thinking. For those who don't know, this is a very touchy subject for some who claim I am racist for not believing all Egyptians were so-called black or other nuanced positions of Afrocentrism. Let us first make the distinction between all, some, and none, because in a previous video I've received some arguments from Afrocentrics claiming I'm saying no Egyptians were so-called black. I'm simply saying some Egyptians weren't black. I would like to mention that I would make the same argument against anyone trying to claim all Egyptians were any single so-called race, including white. As a side note, I feel compelled to reiterate what I said in my first video, that this is simply a rebuttal against the theory. It's not a theory in itself, although I may have erroneously called it that myself in a comment or two. Personally, I see so-called race simply as a phenotype, and I contend it has no place in modern science or society at large. However, this argument uses the concept of race, so I must do so to refute it. So, what is correlation? What is causation? Here's a short video explaining the relationship. I've edited it down for some time. Following, we'll examine the logical problems and lack of causation in Afrocentric theory.
Welcome. I came here today to warn you about the dangers of ice cream. You may not be aware of this, but these innocent-looking cones full of sweetness are one of the major causes of drownings. And I've got the numbers to prove it. So if you plot a graph of the number of ice creams that are sold, and you compare it with the number of drownings, you can see there is clearly an upward trend. And I think it's very safe to conclude from this that we should ban ice cream, because it's very dangerous. Since you are all smart people, you've probably figured out there's something wrong with my example. What's really happening here is, of course, that there is an underlying factor, which is nice weather, you might have guessed it. And if the weather is nice, more people will go out swimming and unfortunately drown, and at the same time more people will buy ice cream. And it's not the ice cream that's causing the drowning. But jumping to an incorrect conclusion about causality when you see a correlation is the most often made logical mistake. So let's move on to a more serious example. It was also more serious research. In Nature was a study in 1999 that showed that young kids who sleep with the lights on, that they have a much higher probability of becoming short-sighted later in life. Well, and the researchers, they were smart and they wrote very careful that they had found a correlation, and they didn't know how the causal relation might work, but just to be sure they advised all parents to turn off the lights at night. And in the popular media, this became that bed lamps were night abuse, children's abuse, and that it was very bad if parents used lamps in the bedroom, and many parents were worried. But luckily, the article had to be corrected the next week. And maybe some of you can guess, if there are biologists in the audience, they know. Short-sightedness is genetic. And so it's parents who are short-sighted, and those are the parents who like to leave the light on in the bedroom. And they also are the parents who have short-sighted kids. So again, you know, a simple mistake, easy to make.
First, let's talk about what Afrocentrism is. I have noticed different nuanced claims, but the majority seems to agree that the ancient Egyptian population was completely so-called black, and that other ideas other civilizations had were really just stolen from black civilization. Some schools even say the Olmecs were black. It's a pseudo-historical and pseudo-scientific position that most modern academics refute. In reality, it's more of a reactionary world and/or political view. Proponents frequently attribute certain political views to Afrocentrism's critics. Yours truly not excluded. Now, let's examine Afrocentrist claims. As before, I'm going to stick to the subject of the so-called race of the Egyptians. Again, there are nuances on this theory, which we'll get to. But generally, the claim is made that all ancient Egyptians were black until invasion. Usually the Hyksos invasion is cited even though modern scholars still can't agree on if it was an invasion or migration. For the sake of this argument, we will say it was an invasion. The anatomically modern humans, or AMHS, came about 35,000 BC as a subspecies. Let's also theorize, in Afrocentrism's favor, that the first appearance was so-called black. There is a great amount of time between the first Homo sapien and the Hyksos, who came in the second intermediate period of Egypt in 1650 BC. This means they're claiming not one person of another appearance lived or visited what was then Egypt and had a child for 33,350 years. Even if we pick the predynastic period as an ending point, the original population would have to remain the same for 31,900 years. If we assume they were all black or the same appearance from the predynastic period to the Hyksos, that's 1,450 years, in which no one of a different appearance came and had a child. So it is painfully obvious the predynastic and or proto-Egyptians were more likely to be so-called mixed than a single race. This does not completely discount a far distant possibility Afrocentrism's claims are correct, but there are much more likely answers, especially since Egypt was a crossroads of peoples in the first place. We would need more specific evidence than put forth by modern Afrocentric arguments, specifically a record indicating the race of exactly every single person, or every single leader in the dynastic race theory. Specific claims need specific evidence. Frequently, Afrocentrists will say, "Oh, look at this statue. It looks black." Alternatively, people who believe the entire population was white say the same thing about Egyptian art. I too once used it in my argument to dismantle Afrocentrism, but I feel like the inherent logical inconsistencies are enough. Also, as with any artwork, it's open to interpretation, so I don't really think either side can use it as surefire proof one way or the other. There's also an argument about limb proportions being more tropical, as though Allen's rule had anything to do with race, or affinities other than bone structure. Afrocentrics are simply replacing the actual cause, climate, with race. This has morphed into a dynastic race theory within Afrocentrism, as well as other fields in the Egyptian race controversy. There are also claims all mummies found were black, although modern science considers them possibly contaminated with others' DNA and or compromised for various reasons. This is also why critics of Afrocentrism say Diop's melanin tests, although a brilliant idea, were sketchy at best. Again, let's give Afrocentrism a running start and assume for this argument every mummy found was black. How does that correlation prove the entire population or dynasty was black? It doesn't, because there's no apparent cause for the correlation. And yet proponents still use correlation as proof without another variable as the cause. But this is also a logical fallacy. My frequent mantra about this is, this apple is green, so all apples are green. This statue looks black, therefore all Egyptians were black. Or, this statue looks black, therefore all leaders were black. Afrocentrists are only observing correlation and working it into their theory, rather than trying to find a cause. Let's say I was an alien coming to Earth millions of years from now, and excavated the ruins of New York City and found in the ice 800 preserved bodies that were all white. Does that mean the entire population was white? Of course not. All we are observing is an apparent correlation, not the cause of that correlation, if there is a cause at all. If we had some record of the race of the ancient Egyptians over time, akin to a census, that would really do the trick. But the social concept of race is contemporary to the Egyptians. This means Afrocentrism injects these social constructs somewhere they would otherwise not exist. In the end, it's a lot of limited and/or misinterpreted data, and that certainly doesn't help Afrocentrism. Not to mention taking any correlation and just running with it proves nothing. You really can't blame researchers and even Afrocentrists for being human and wanting to see their ideas take shape and be proven. We all have a certain bias for ideas, myself included, but what's important to remember is I do these videos because I once believed not only in Afrocentric ideas, but things like ancient aliens and the like. I have since learned that, at best, believers present so-called evidence from a book they've read, and at worst, they depend on the audience's ignorance of the topic and profit from it. All of the so-called evidence presented to me by believers, as well as reading positions and theories, seems to be simply correlation. What critics like myself want to see is cause for them remaining one appearance for the large amount of time Afrocentrists claim they remained black. Moreover, I'd like to see a source that says either every Egyptian was black or every Egyptian ruler was black. In most of their citations, Afrocentrists will frequently quote things like the UNESCO Symposium in 1974, and some even claim it's their proof. However, the conclusions reached in that symposium were not optimal for Afrocentrists. You can read it by Googling for the document. A link will be provided in the transcript below. The same situation happens when a proponent of this theory uses studies about anything not related directly to the race of the Egyptians. They are simply noticing correlations and call it their causation. Sometimes proponents replace the meaning of words used to mean black. African changes to black. Culture changes to black. Tropical limb proportions mean black. It's really the only way the theory will work because there is zero evidence of causation for these half-baked correlations based on unrelated ideas and studies, i.e. Allen's rule. We also can't take Afrocentric ideas very seriously because they depend on some ideas that are now either more questioned by modern scholarship or once accepted and are now completely rejected, i.e. Diop's melanin test, dynastic race theory. If there was irrefutable causal evidence for Afrocentrism's claims, it would naturally be accepted by modern science, or at least the majority in it, and it has not. We also would not be hearing the causation is the correlation. Not to mention, this is clearly a knee-jerk political reaction to the racist white guy science of the past, which of course did downplay the role of so-called blacks in history. But can a politically motivated truth be the truth at all? Freedom is the freedom to say correlation is not causation. Finally, what is truly astounding is these claims are very similar to the claims of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. There were Nazi scientists who would travel the world in search of Aryan features, so they could basically rewrite history according to their racist and anti-Semitic views.
German archaeologists have excavated Troy, Mycenae, and Babylon. Now they are to unearth the glories of Aryan prehistory. This is why he is here, to convert people to data, to search for signs of the Aryans among their proportions. His method also entails making facial casts for later comparison. The Nazis' ideal of a pure Aryan type from which they descend was supported by the German science of the day. The 1938 expedition is to find physical proof. Bager eventually produces a collection of Tibetan heads. Faces he believes conceal the characteristics of the Aryan superrace.
Both believed that the Aryans, a mythical and superior race, had invented everything of value in human history, from agriculture to architecture, the creation of theater, and fine art.
These views came from the existing political spectrum in Germany, but also arguably from the real or imagined persecution and problems Germany was facing, i.e. the Treaty of Versailles. I see the same case in Afrocentrism. It is an attempt to couple ideas for political purposes in reaction to real or imagined persecution, i.e. scientific and historic disinterest in blacks during the 19th and early 20th century. In closing, I would like to mention that comments might be moderated here only because I don't want anyone to be disrespected. Both sides are welcome to say what they will, but please don't resort to name-calling. Thank you for watching. No person is a color. We are all human beings. Please keep this in mind.